Ready to go? Hello, good evening. Is it on? Good evening, everybody. Hello, good evening. We're about to get started. My name is Karen Tucker. I'm the CEO and a board member of the Churchill Club. I'm pleased to welcome you this evening, and we are very privileged and honored to have with us Arianna Huffington and Rich Karlgaard. Arianna and Rich, thank you very much for being here. Before we start, quickly, I have a couple of Churchill Club announcements. Next Monday, March 1, the club presents a program about trends in managing corporate reputation, a topic with a lot of currency, especially given what we're reading in the news about Toyota and Tiger Woods and so forth. Expect a great discussion. I hope you can join us for that one. And the morning of March 3rd, we present a program about innovation and change in the legal industry, which some have said could be an oxymoron, but that does seem to be an industry that heretofore was immune to change with all the technology advances and so forth, but we're seeing changes, and we're going to talk about them that morning, so you may read your programs tonight for details, or as always, check our website at churchillclub.org. I would like to acknowledge and thank Microsoft for hosting and sponsoring tonight's program. Thank you so much, Microsoft. And my last announcement, if you are tweeting tonight, please do use #Churchill Club. Thank you. Let me now ask Daniel Lewin to come to the stage to take over as host and introduce our speakers. Daniel is not only Corporate Vice President of Strategic and Emerging Business Development at Microsoft, but he is also Chairman of the Board of the Churchill Club. Daniel?
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Welcome to Microsoft. How many people have never been here before? Oh, we've got a good selection of new people. Welcome to our campus. We have almost 3,000 people in the Bay Area, so this is a center point for our campus, and we love participating in the community and hosting events like this, and I'm honored to be involved with the Churchill Club, and as Karen said, I'm the chair this year. But more importantly, I'm here to introduce our guest tonight. We're very fortunate to have Arianna Huffington here to speak in a conversation with Rich Karlgaard. Rich, most people know, is publisher of Forbes. He had a little bit to do with the founding of the Churchill Club as well. And Forbes is one of the oldest nation's business magazines, founded nearly 100 years ago. Rich has his Digital Rules column. He writes about technology, entrepreneurships, economic development, and the future of business and work. And he is a terrific person and a fantastic interviewer, so we're really looking forward to this. He lectures on various subjects across the board. He's the co-founder of the Churchill Club. We're in our 25th year, so thanks to him, we've got these programs to look forward to. Arianna Huffington is, I would say, famously known as the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Huffington Post. The news and blog site has quickly become one of the most widely read and linked to sites on the internet. And she is a nationally syndicated columnist and author of 12 books. In addition, she co-hosts Left, Right, and Center on the public radio and political roundtable program, and she's frequently a guest on many, many programs, including Charlie Rose, Bill Maher, Larry King Live. And as we all know, she doesn't need much of an introduction, so I'm going to pass it off at that point and ask Rich and Arianna to take over the program. Thanks so much.
Usually when you do these kinds of on-stage conversations, it's typical of the moderator to get it rolling, maybe take up half the time and then open up questions for the second half, but I detect a lot of interest, so we're going to go to audience questions sooner rather than later. Arianna, what a wonderful career you've had. I envy your career as a public intellectual and entrepreneur of ideas. I want to talk about a number of things tonight. The Huffington Post, how you started that, your insight, how you recruit all these great people to contribute to it. I want to talk about the future of media. What does it mean to traditional media when we have so many of these new media companies coming up? The traditional media companies are under a siege right now. And I want to talk about politics, and not so much, I think, to get into a partisan squabble, but really to really kind of elevate it, because I think everybody in this room has real concerns about the body politic right now. Things seem very fragile. It certainly seems the most fragile it has that I've seen since the Watergate days. But let's start out with the present first and work more backward, talk about your career a little bit, and then politics. The Huffington Post. What was the animating idea behind it?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. It's really great to be here. And you already made me feel extremely welcome. We had a fascinating discussion about my handbag that you are considering as a birthday present for your wife. I hope she's not here so we don't surprise, you can still surprise her. So I like this combination of intimacy and technology. And in a way, that was part of the idea, the animating idea behind the Huffington Post, that how to take conversations that we have in our lives about everything, from politics to handbags, and put it online. And that was at the time, May 2005 when we launched, before the idea of a collective blog was as prominent as now. We were really the first sort of collective blog. And one of the things that my co-founder, Kenny Lair, and I really wanted to achieve was to bring people into the online conversation who had not been online and who probably would never be online. So the first person said that I invited to blog was Arthur Schlesinger. And I called him up and he said to me, what's a blog? And I started to explain, and he said, let me take you to lunch at the, was it the Churchill Club or some kind of Century Club in New York, the Century Club. And I remember he and I were the youngest people there. That gives you an idea of the Century Club. So it was a kind of strange background in which we discussed blogging. And he said to me, you know, I don't really use a computer. I have this old typewriter I write on. I said, don't worry. You can fax me your blogs. And literally, he would fax me his blogs. But so whenever there would be something in the news that would get his interest, I remember when the President Bush at the time, gave a speech that mentioned the Yalta Agreement, and Schlesinger had been there. He just sent me 2 paragraphs about why the president was wrong on the Yalta Agreement. And as that arrived by fax, I thought, that's it. That's what I wanted, you know, to be able to have people join the conversation in real time in a way that otherwise they wouldn't do. Because sure, Arthur Schlesinger could write an article for the New York Times anytime he wanted, but would he really take the trouble, you know, to connect with editors, be edited? So that was one of the animating ideas. And the other animating idea was to be a curator of news, not just an aggregator, because we have our own point of view. So we kind of decide what we consider the most important story, the less important story. So there's a combination of news, 24/7 refreshed, a collective blog of interesting voices, some established, some new, and a very vibrant community.
Well, it is an interesting collection of people that you brought together. I mean, traditional journalists, historians like Arthur Schlesinger, people from Hollywood, people who are smart and opinionated. I mean, so you have leveraged your celebrity well to recruit all of those people, because I imagine you're not paying them a fortune to write for Huffington Post.
Well, let's talk about that. Because we need to distinguish between the people we pay, and we pay a lot of people. Fred Harmon, who is on our board, knows how many we pay. He's our major investor, so we're very grateful for what he's made possible. And as we were just discussing in our board meeting, we now have over 100 full-time people. So we pay a lot of editors, we pay a lot of reporters, we pay obviously our tech team and our marketing team. Our bloggers write whenever they want, they have no deadlines, there are no expectations. So for them, it's really whenever they want to enter the conversation, they do so. So about 3,000 people have their own password, so they can write anytime they want. And at the same time, we get thousands of submissions that our editors go through and decide what to post. But the larger conversation that would be interesting to have here is to understand what has happened with self-expression right now, that people constantly express themselves for free, you know, whether it's editing Wikipedia entries or updating their Facebooks or tweeting. And while in the past people would spend perhaps hours on a couch watching TV, now self-expression has become the new entertainment. And a lot of people in old media, I'm counting you out of that, don't really get that. So they don't quite understand, why are these people blogging for free? Or why are they editing Wikipedia entries for free? They never said, why are they watching bad TV for free?
One of the things I'm impressed about your site is that the level of conversation in the comments stays pretty high tone for quite a long period of time, and that's not true of a lot of opinion sites. And as a blogger myself on Forbes.com, I've noticed a Gresham's law. You know, bad commentators drive out good commentators. The nutters drive out people who have something to really contribute, because the nutters, by definition, have way too much time on their hands. My friend Quentin Hardy, my colleague, calls them raging cubicle monkeys. And how do you? But you seem to do either you're drawing you're drawing a better group of people to begin with, which I assume you are. You've got some kind of self-policing among the commentators themselves, or are you actively sort of moderating the comments?
Well, we are actively moderating the comments. That was a very deliberate decision early on, which was a significant monetary commitment for us, you know. And that was because we wanted to keep the conversation at a level where people would really want to participate. And you're absolutely right about Gresham's law. So we actually have 30 part-time comment moderators who are working 24/7. And every blog post is automatically pre-moderated, so that if we invite you and you agree to cross-post, say, whatever you're writing or whenever you feel like it, you would at least know that this would be a civil environment. People may disagree with you, but they're not going to call you names. And on the news side, our editors decide what to put on different levels of pre-moderation depending on how volatile the subject matter is.
Yeah, well, I think it works very nicely. Now, you use the word curator as opposed to just a simple aggregator, and a curator along a certain point of view. I forget the words that William F. Buckley used when he founded National Review in the 1950s, but it was a wonderful phrase to describe the way that we look at the world at this political opinion journal. How would you describe the worldview of the Huffington Post?
I would describe it as beyond left and right. I would describe it as identifying what are the areas where the majority of American opinion is, if we really analyze it. Let's take, for example, what's happening on the economic crisis front. It's a fascinating convergence. I wrote a post recently where I quoted an editorial in the Wall Street Journal next to an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal criticizing Goldman Sachs. On the grounds that what was happening with Goldman Sachs and what had happened with the government bailout was not really free enterprise capitalism. It was the government picking winners and losers. It was certain companies being able to make huge profits for their traders and their shareholders while being backed by taxpayer guarantees, which are ongoing. Even after these banks returned the bailout money, as you know perfectly well, being the publisher of Forbes, they still benefit from almost zero financing at the Fed window and deposit guarantees, et cetera, et cetera. So this is one of the areas where we want to define the beyond left and right positions, where people who would be considered liberals and people who would be considered conservatives actually agree that we need to redefine capitalism, and that what we have right now is a very broken system, and that we need to get to capitalism 2.0. So that's one area. Let's take another area in foreign policy, Afghanistan. You know, we consider this a tragic decision by the Obama administration. Afghanistan is not in our national security interest. So when George Will came out and wrote a very cogent piece opposing escalating in Afghanistan, we splashed it on the Huffington Post. That's what I mean by curating. And the headline was, "Beyond Left and Right, George Will opposes escalating in Afghanistan." And yet, a lot of mainstream moderators continue to look at Afghanistan as right versus left. So if you say you're opposed to escalating in Afghanistan, you're assumed to be on the left, while many conservatives are against that kind of investment of treasure and life for something that is not in the national security interest of the United States.
Well, another one that surprised me pleasantly is occasionally I'll find John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods, contributing. And John Mackey wrote a piece on the op-ed page of the Wall Street Journal arguing against Obamacare, saying here's how we do it better and cheaper, more effectively at Whole Foods for our own employees. And he was absolutely trashed by the left. But I love the way you are willing to kind of break the mold and have, I read it because I'm always surprised. You know, just when I think you're falling into a certain definable position, you know, you surprise me in pleasant ways.
Well, we invite conservatives constantly to participate in the debate on the Huffington Post. Tony Blankley, for example, you know, the former press secretary of Newt Gingrich, is a regular contributor. John Fund writes for us, Daniel Crittenden, David Frum. A lot of conservatives regularly contribute.
I want to talk about, before we talk about the sort of the present political turmoil and standoffs going in Washington, but you were formed in 2005 and in 2008. 3 years after your founding, you played an enormously influential role in the Democratic primary. You came out for Barack Obama pretty strongly. The Daily Kos came out, I think Marco Smolitsas came out for John Edwards. I'm sure an endorsement that he'd wish to have back now, although he's not the kind to admit any kind of mistake. But as did Paul Krugman, came out for John Edwards. What did you see in Barack Obama? And what, if I may say one thing, it seemed like you were awfully rough on Hillary Clinton.
Well, on two reasons. I really very much objected to Hillary Clinton's position on the war in Iraq, because I felt that, as many people close to her that I've talked to have acknowledged, that she felt that as the first woman serious candidate for president, she had to take this hawkish position on Iraq. And that was very troubling to me, because I consider Iraq the most tragic foreign policy mistake America has ever made. And I use that very deliberately, because even though supposedly now we're getting ready to leave Iraq, etc., you know, if you think of what the cost has been, I don't mean just the financial cost, although this is very significant as we are facing horrendous deficits, but the cost in terms of goodwill, in terms of taking our eye off Afghanistan and other dangerous spots. That was, for me, a major issue, and Barack Obama caught my attention because of his position on the war in Iraq. So as you can imagine, I'm particularly disappointed now that he's taken the position he has taken on Afghanistan. And the Huffington Post has been very critical of Obama and the administration. Coming off the 2008 election, many people expect us to be kind of cheerleaders, and were surprised when we were not.
What should he be doing that he's not doing?
Well, he should be firing Larry Summers.
Anyone else? Some say his whole Chicago Mafia.
Well, let me just explain my Larry Summers position. In Denver, when Barack Obama accepted the nomination, he said something which was very significant. He said the greatest risk would be for us to go to Washington and bring together the same people to do the same things, expecting different results.
That's the definition of insanity.
Which is the definition of insanity. And that's exactly what he did on the financial front. He brought together Larry Summers and Tim Geithner and Ben Bernanke. Larry Summers was the architect of the abolition of Glass-Steagall, which is considered by many as one of the contributing factors to the financial meltdown. Larry Summers, if you go back to his writings, and I've written a lot about it, in the 1990s, was exultant about this new free economy which would operate on Darwinian principles and which would not be fettered by the post-New Deal restrictions and which would usher indefinite prosperity. And we saw how well that turned out for millions of Americans. So the fact that Larry Summers basically is the person closest to the president determining financial policy is tragic. And you know, poor Paul Volcker was basically allowed occasional symbolic visits while banished to the basement together with Austin Goolsbee. And they were brought out after they lost Massachusetts. You know, the day after Scott Brown became the senator-elect, Paul Volcker came out to talk about the Volcker Rule. We don't know what's going to happen to the Volcker Rule now. But that, for me, it was the biggest mistake with huge consequences, because the president wasted an entire year of good economic policy that could have actually averted the ongoing economic losses, job losses, and foreclosures that really will continue with no end in sight. I mean, nobody has been able to tell me what is the engine of job growth. Like, how are we suddenly going to get jobs? I remember Larry Summers on This Week about 2.5 months ago being interviewed by George Stephanopoulos and saying, you know, there will be growth in the spring. He sounded like Chauncey Gardner. He said the best economic forecasters, you know, are telling us there will be growth in the spring. There will not be job growth in the spring. So that, for me, is a very dangerous moment to be in, and I'd love us to talk more about that in terms of what's happening to the middle class, you know, the crumbling middle class at the moment. It's dangerous not just economically, but also politically.
It is, but what is to be done? I mean, we've had horrible downturns in the past, the Great Depression, more recently, the 1973 and 74 recession, which produced numbers that are closest to this one. Yet in the 1970s, we had the formation of Federal Express, Southwest Airlines, Microsoft, Apple, Genentech, Oracle. I mean, Hewlett-Packard was started during a depression. Maybe those engines of growth are out there and we just don't recognize them.
Well, I agree with you about the fact that innovation and social entrepreneurship are where the engines of growth will be found. I completely agree with you on that. My point is that we are in a more fragile position than we were in the 70s, because during the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, salaries and wages of the middle class did not really follow up the productivity gains. The discrepancies between the richest Americans and not just the poorest Americans, but the middle class grew much worse. And on top of it, the middle class got into more and more debt. I mean, this is a combination of their fault, plus a huge cultural assumption that the good times would go on forever, that the price of your house would keep getting on higher and higher forever, and that you could keep borrowing against your credit card and refinancing your house, and that somehow would never end.
Well, you're a lifelong student of the Enlightenment and democracy, but suppose you went to the dark side and you had dictatorial powers in the United States. How would you fix all that?
Well, I have so many plans. Okay, I would start
Besides not hiring Larry Summers.
I would start with a low-hanging fruit. I would split up Citigroup into 3. I would make it a model. You know, we own this place, right? Okay, we, the taxpayers, are the majority shareholder. And what are we doing? We're letting them do whatever they want. You know, as majority shareholders, don't we have a responsibility to turn into a model bank? I would separate commercial from investment banking functions. I would make the commercial bank a model bank that would not be allowed to charge usury rates on credit cards, like 29%, 30%, as they can charge now. That would basically start lending again, because as you know, the big banks have cut lending by $100 billion. And I want you to go back and remember how the bailout was sold to the American people. This is the way to free up lending, we were told. And so freeing up Citigroup splitting up Citigroup would be the first thing I would do. I would replace Tim Geithner with Elizabeth Warren. You don't have to be an economist to be the head of the Treasury. You just need to understand what's happening in the country. And she does, and she understands very deeply what position the middle class is in. That's been her focus. I would have a very, very intense job growth program that would include a payroll tax holiday. That would include infrastructure projects. And I would also do a lot of using the bully pulpit to encourage people to be part of the solution, because I don't believe that government can solve all problems. I believe that we need to activate the private sector.
So you did learn something from your days as a conservative.
Absolutely, and I will always, you and I first met during my conservative days at the Progress and Freedom Foundation. And back then, I had launched a group called the Center for Effective Compassion. And I still believe now that what the private sector does in terms of giving back, being engaged in the community is crucial. There's no way we can just delegate our compassion to government.
Well, you describe something that is sort of radically centrist.
I forgot to say something.
Yes.
I would leave Afghanistan.
Yeah. You describe really something that's radically centrist. I think I have this theory that if we had a chance to vote for anybody for president right now, and Bill Clinton could run for president, he would be elected because he was a kind of centrist. I mean, a man of liberal sensibilities, progressive sensibilities, but he also had an effective and well-meaning antagonist in Newt Gingrich. And together we got this kind of centrism that served the country pretty well. What is it about today that makes centrism so hard? I mean, anybody who tries to be a centrist, whether it's Evan Bayh or Olympia Snow, just gets crucified by the bloggers on both ends, by even the networks. I mean, even you look at Fox and MSNBC. They're splitting apart. They have almost nothing kind to say about each other at all, making any kind of centrism of the kind you describe impossible to achieve.
I think we need to make a distinction between centrism and middle-of-the-road mushiness. And these two are very different. Because otherwise, centrism becomes splitting the difference between the two, and that's not really what centrism should mean. Because otherwise, what we're really saying is that anybody can have any kind of opinion independently of whether it's based on facts or not. And there's a distinction between what Glenn Beck does and what Keith Olbermann does. Keith Olbermann may come out and you may not agree with what he says. He may be over-the-top passionate. He may be angry, et cetera, but what he says is based on fact. Glenn Beck is based on an overheated imagination that sees people being slaughtered, that sees, he says things like, who is going to be next for the killing? And presents, the Obama administration like some Bolshevik revolution, which is really hard to fathom.
He did out a Tea Party truther in the Texas gubernatorial race, though, who basically comes out of the radical Ron Paul wing, which is basically a reincarnation of the John Birch Society. So he occasionally does some good things.
He does the occasional thing, but when I was on This Week with Roger Ailes and I pointed some of these things out, his response, which Glenn Beck also had the same response the next day, was, oh no, when he talked about people being slaughtered, he was referring to Stalin and Hitler. But there is video. and we put it up on the Huffington Post, and he wasn't. He was referring to the Obama administration. And I think that is dangerous. I think especially at a time of fear and anxiety, to revert to that kind of conspiratorial mindset appeals to the worst in people.
But the problem with the internet is that the nutters now have a way of finding each other. And they now feel validation in being a nutter. And so, you know, you can propose some wild conspiracy theory, or you can have, you know, put out poisonous stuff, be it engage in child pornography, anything that's really off the acceptable grid, that in past, you know, you would have felt ashamed. There would be some semblance of shame. But when you find your fellow nutters and your fellow pervs out there on the net, it's almost like a validating thing. And we now have this sort of centrifugal force in American politics that is sending things to the periphery. So I don't believe that we need to go that the middle necessarily has to be mushy. It can be enlightened and future-oriented, fact-based, reason-based.
In terms of the internet, you know, it's interesting because obviously it makes it easier for any nutter, as you said, to gain credence among his fellow nutters. But it
I am the king of the nutters.
But it also makes it easier for these voices to be discredited. It makes it much easier for the truth to emerge. And I think what's happening now with the instant production of pre-existing video that challenges what people are saying now and compares it to what they said a month ago or a year ago. I love that. I love these juxtapositions that have made Jon Stewart famous. And it makes it much harder to just have a different kind of opinion depending on where the political winds are blowing.
Well, before I open it up for audience questions, describe your own political evolution. As I say, I think I ran into you in a conference in the mid-1990s, the Progress and Freedom Foundation, which is sort of right libertarian, I guess. But a lot of it came around the inspiration of Newt Gingrich. I know you were friends with Newt Gingrich. And what have you evolved, or has the system evolved and you've stayed constant?
No, I have evolved. The system has devolved. Well, I'll tell you everything you want to know about my relationship with Newt Gingrich. In 1992, I gave a speech in Washington on, and the title of the speech was, "Can Conservatives Have a Social Conscience?" And the speech was carried by C-SPAN. And I got a call from Newt Gingrich saying to me, I didn't know him, saying, I just watched you on C-SPAN, and what you said is exactly what we should be doing in the Republican Party. Because what I said is that Republicans needed to really look at the Bible, since they claimed, you know, that they believed in the Bible. The Bible wrote a lot more about our responsibility to the poor, and that we shall be judged by what we do for the least among us, and that from whom much is given, to him that much more shall be expected, and wrote nothing about abortion and gay rights, etc. So that was my speech, and so he invited me to speak to the caucus of the Republican members and about these themes. And he really made me believe that that was something that was going to be very important if he became Speaker in '94. And if you go back and read Newt Gingrich's speech when he first became Speaker, it was an amazing speech. He praised FDR. He talked about how our responsibility to the poor is greater than our responsibility to balancing the budget. That was strictly radical compared to what's happening now, compared to what the Republican Party is, Newt Gingrich is, the country is. And I really thought that he meant all that. And then it turned out that he didn't. And I started a syndicated column, and I started being critical of what they were doing very early on, I would say about 1995. And the final thing, the thing that ended our relationship, was that I wrote in '96 a column criticizing their drug war policy. Because Gingrich was critical of Clinton at the time, saying they're not doing enough to fight the drug war. And I wrote a column saying Newt Gingrich claims that the war on poverty cannot be won in Washington. And now he thinks the war on drugs is going to be won from Washington. And he took he cut the column out of the Washington Times. And on the margin, I have it framed in my house if you want to come see it, he wrote, "This column is strategically counterproductive. What good does it do to take on your allies so soon before the election?" He didn't say this column is wrong. He didn't say I don't agree with you. He called it strategically counterproductive, which seemed very Leninist to me. And, and I thought, I'm not an employee of the RNC, and I don't do counterproductive for what's good for you guys. And that was it. I thought, I don't belong here.
Well, let's open up for audience questions. We have many. Yep, mics going around the room. How do you want to? Okay, we got one here.
I think everybody here is very familiar with the innovator's dilemma thesis and the general difficulty that incumbents have in responding to innovators. But notwithstanding that, I'm genuinely surprised at how poorly the traditional media companies have responded to the internet and things like the Huffington Post. And so this is for both of you guys. Why in an industry that seems fairly dynamic and about information is the business leadership of the traditional media grappling with so much difficulty with the new media?
You go first, Rich.
I know. Notice how this is positioned. Arianna good, us dumb. Forbes is over 90 years old. It's a third-generation family-owned company. It's like a lot of traditional media companies. We are on the wrong end of the innovator's dilemma. We've been there, and we've been moving as rapidly as we can to get on the right side. And you find out that it's just hard to let go of some things that you thought you could do. There's a wonderful phrase that Clayton Christensen has about margin retreat. And that is when suddenly you're faced with all these new competitors with much lower costs of operations who are charging lower fees. I mean, the average internet ad, I think, is like down to $1 or $2 per thousand. And we can't live on $1 or $2. Maybe Arianna can live on $1 or $2 per thousand because her model is new and it's set up that way. We need to be at least 10x over that, or we don't live. So we have to find, we can't. For a while, I think we were caught in a margin retreat. But the good thing is that as a family-owned company, we were able to invest a lot of money when it was very painful in the early 2000s, and are doing relatively better than our competitive set. But it's a tough one. You read these books. When the Innovator's Dilemma came out in the 90s, you read. It's one thing to read them and think, oh, I can see this industry that's going to get walloped, and this one, and this one, and this one. And then all of a sudden, like a Pac-Man doll, the Google algorithmic model of advertising starts bearing down on you. You run, you face it, you draw your sword. It's tough. The one other thing I'd say is that we've had, over the last 2 years at Forbes, about 40% attrition. It's been very painful. But where we've had a net gain is in IT people. We simply have to have the kind of interface between advertising and technology that delivers to advertisers what they want, which is performance metrics. Just one more quick story. If you read Ken Auletta's Googled, he has this wonderful story where Mel Karmazin, the president of CBS, visits Google, and it's after the ad model has been invented, but before they went public. So this must be around 2002, something like that. And Karmazin thinks he's going to Bigfoot these little punks, and he got quite an earful from them. Hey, Mel, you're toast. Advertisers aren't going to spend money on image alone. You've got to have performance metrics, and we know how to do them. And he stared at these guys, and he said, "Don't F with the magic." And they've effed with the magic. It's like going from the Middle Ages to the Enlightenment. And so, they've dragged us kicking and screaming there. But Arianna's who you want to hear from, because she's pulled it off from scratch.
No, I think, first of all, I don't think anybody has pulled it off. I think this is a work in progress. I think we are constantly looking at the advertising models. I don't think it's just CPMs, looking at sponsorships, looking at bringing advertisers in different ways, provided there is clear demarcation between edit and advertising. I mean, I think advertisers need to innovate. I mean, there are many, many ways in which to advertise online that haven't yet been invented. And that's really where a lot of new thinking needs to happen. And I think the answers are being invented every day. There is no finished product. I mean, everything is a work in progress. The minute we thought we had it, we would die. We are constantly evolving. If you look at the Huffington Post now, it's unrecognizable to what it was in May 2005. We were just one section. We now just launched 2 new sections this week, so we're up to 19 sections. We just launched College, for example, which has been a big success on Monday, with partnering with now up to 80 colleges around the country, from Ivy League colleges to state universities, and providing a place where there can be a conversation among college kids and academics. And the first big story, which was crowdsourced, because we're using citizen journalism more and more, was about student debt and what it means. And people had a place to come and tell their story. So basically, it's an amazing time to be in this business. And I think what you've done with Forbes.com is great. I don't think it's just the new kids on the block who are going to be doing the reinvention. I think legacy publishers are waking up and are doing a lot of good things. The New York Times is doing a lot of good things with Twitter and Facebook and creating their own applications. So the turmoil is also an amazing time of innovation.
Well, I think what we have that buys us time is a brand, a real brand. And I think what you've done in an extraordinarily short period of time is create a brand. Your investors are happy that you've done that. A brand that you can extend across different, beyond just sort of political commentary and salon-like talk, not capital S salon, but you know what I mean. And, I mean, you've got a wonderful platform for brand extensions, because your brand has become so powerful in such a short period of time.
Well, actually, right now, the traffic that we get from our politics section is only a quarter of our whole traffic. So, and our traffic, the new sort of ComScore numbers have us at about 26 million uniques a month. And a lot of that traffic is now coming from entertainment, from media, from style, from living. And I'd love to talk to you. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Our living section is like my obsession, because it deals with a lot of the issues that you're dealing with, like in your book, the book about moving to small towns and changing your life. I love that, because I feel that there's a tremendous amount of rethinking of our priorities and our lives going on, especially in the middle of this economic crisis. It's been accelerated. And so I'm really interested in, we are calling it in our living section, unplug and recharge. How everybody here is incredibly hyper-connected. And how do we unplug and recharge and connect with ourselves and our own wisdom and our own insights? And I think that's where creativity comes. I mean, look at Winston Churchill, after whom I presume the club is named, unless there is some geek called Churchill that I haven't. Well, he was a great napper, and he said that his best ideas came after a nap. And we, in our present kind of crazed, speedy world, we think that sleep deprivation is the way to success. And especially you guys, men, I think, have turned sleep deprivation into a virility symbol. So I think, it's time to reevaluate all that. And so I want to hear about your book and how it came about.
I wrote a book called Life 2.0 about people who left high-cost areas like New York and Silicon Valley during the last recession of 01 and 02, and to see if they could marry technology with different lifestyles, living in smaller communities, and where were they going. And I found out a lot of them were going to college towns, places like, sort of some obvious places like Austin, Texas, but some less obvious places like Lawrence, Kansas, and even to the farmlands. And there was a subset of people who might have grown up in small towns and left because they felt so disconnected, but with all this connective technology, had moved back. I thought it would be a bigger trend than it turned out to be, but I think it's one that will unfold steadily over time, because the economics are going to force people, I think, to do that. And this gets to your question, your concerns about middle class, that as a colleague of mine at Forbes says, we're all kind of forced to live with the China price, as she calls it. And that's hard for a lot of industries to adapt to the China price.
It is, and we also see, there was a Brookings Institution study that just came out that just using 2008 numbers, we don't have the 2009 numbers yet, shows that the greatest increase in poverty has been in the suburbs. And I was speaking this morning at the National Association Conference of Independent Schools, and all private schools around the country, and they were telling me, how hard it's been for them, how many of their families, which are actually more even upper middle class than middle class, cannot return to their schools without financial aid. And they had to up financial aid by 15% this year just to keep a lot of the families in the school. So all these signs of what's happening are everywhere, and it's not clear to me how we reverse these trends, except for all these amazing innovations that are happening, but we don't know yet about.
Next question.
And I'd love to know who is asking the question, so I learn about you guys too.
Yeah,
Okay.
Arianna, I was going to ask you, could you give us your opinion, please, on this Tea Party movement? Is it a flash in the pan, or is it something longer term? What's the relationship going to be with the Republican Party, and how much of all this is influenced by modern media?
And where were you born?
New Zealand.
New Zealand. We
Thank
people
you.
with accents have to stick together. Well, I actually think that the Tea Party movement is like the boil that signifies an infection underneath. So, the boil is like an unpleasant expression of the infection, but it also alerts us to the infection. So I think it's very important to pay attention to what it's telling us. And what it's really telling us is sort of, are you hearing us? Are you hearing us? We are angry. We feel that the system is rigged, that the fix is in, that what's happened to Wall Street and what happened to Main Street is not fair. And so it's not, a lot of them go out of their way to tell you they are not Republicans. That they are independents. Even Sarah Palin, when she was interviewed at the first Tea Party convention, went out of her way to say, my husband didn't vote Republican, he's an independent. And her interviewer went out of his way to say that his wife wasn't a Republican, she was an independent. So the Republican Party cannot control that movement. Nobody can control it. We don't really know what's going to happen. And my biggest concern is that at times of real economic insecurity, it's very easy for dangerous demagogues to prevail, to appeal to the worst in people, to appeal to our lizard brains, as opposed to our rational minds. And that's why things that are completely ridiculous take hold. Barack Obama was born in Kenya. Show us your birth certificate. That kind of stuff, which are much less likely to prevail during normal times. And you mentioned Bill Clinton. I was at Walter Schornstein's 95th birthday party last night. It's interesting to see how alert he still is at 95. And Bill Clinton was there. And he was talking about how the public interest is not at the forefront for many people right now. It's like there is a sense that special interests, whatever they are more powerful than the public interest. And we need to get back to the public interest being being sort of the overwhelming force.
Many next questions. Next question. I knew there would be a lot of questions.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, very well. I wanted to know, when you started the Huffington Post, I don't know if you ever dreamed that you would be put essentially in direct competition with some of these mainstream traditional news sources such as the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And I'm wondering, essentially now, if you feel that the Huffington Post can be collaborative with them or if it's always going to be directly competitive. And also, essentially, if what you would do if you were at the helm of one of these traditional online news media sources, what you would do to compete with the Huffington Post and to distinguish themselves from that.
You're Pinch Salzburger. What do you do?
Well, first of all...
Because I imagine you don't want to be Rupert. So.
Well, you know, I don't see it as like, we don't wake up every day at the Huffington Post and think of us as competing. Obviously, we're delighted when we get our ComScore numbers and we're ahead, as we are right now, of the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and USA Today, and the New York Times remains ahead of us. But we are kind of following our own drama. You know, we are not looking at what are they doing, what are we doing. And if they make the mistake of going behind paywalls or using metering, that will be like the worst thing they can do from a business perspective. Because for news and opinion journalism, that is really not a model that you can return to. You know, the famous Greek philosopher Heraclitus said you cannot enter into the same river twice. And they're trying to enter into that river again. And that, for me, is really incomprehensible. So if they do that, I think they will be making a big mistake, and it will make it easier for online media like the Huffington Post to get further ahead, because right now, unless you have very specialized content, like very specialized financial content that helps people invest or make decisions like that, we're living in the linked economy. And so we welcome these collaborations. And if you look at the Huffington Post linking, say, to the New York Times or to other mainstream publications, we drive a lot of traffic to them. And that's traffic that they can monetize. In the same way, when we link to MSNBC, you know, and we have their embeddable player on the site, and they can sell advertising on their embeddable player, you know, they can monetize their traffic. You know, it's like that's the new world we live in. It's like it's a very promiscuous world, and promiscuity may not be good in relationships, but it's good in new media. You know, it's like you take your content and you put it everywhere.
Not long ago, the New York Times did put its star columnists like Tom Friedman and Maureen Dowd and Paul Krugman behind the paid wall. Time Select, and they learned that nobody came.
Right, and the columnists hated it.
Because they were no longer in the national discussion.
Yeah,
they were out of the national discussion. Next question. Yes.
Arianna, thank you for gracing us with your presence tonight. You mentioned that you're starting a new arts section, and that's very exciting. Your book on Maria Callas really brings the diva's artistic contributions to life, and I wondered what you think is least understood about Callas.
I wrote a book about Maria Callas in 1980, and well, for me, I looked at her as a woman as well as an artist, and it was kind of very important because when I was writing the book, I was 30, and I really wanted to have children, and she had reached the point where she couldn't have children anymore. So I remember that it was very important for me to understand that struggle in her between her career and her wanting to be a mother and what happened. And so I saw her both as an artist but also as a woman, so I wrote it more like a sort of novel of her life. And yes, as I mentioned to you earlier before we started, we are launching an art section, and you promised you're going to write for it since you're an artist. And you see, that's how I collect contributors. You're all invited to contribute on anything you want, and that's really, honestly, the way we collect some great voices, people who want to be part of the debate, whether it's the arts debate or the science debate or the religion section that we just launched on Wednesday.
Next. Yes.
Enjoy the show Left, Right, and Center. And I was wondering if you care to comment on some of the off-the-air dynamics and about your co-hosts on the show.
Yes, Left, Right, and Center is a show that we've been doing now for 14 years. And it's, Matt Miller is the moderator, and Bob Scheer, who's been writing for the LA Times until very recently, and Tony Bluntly. And it's we really like each other. We are rarely in the same place. Like tomorrow I'm doing it from here. Tony is mostly in Washington. But, it's a really good discussion because we respect each other. So even when we don't agree, like Tony has such a brilliant mind that he's like the best expression of a conservative position.
He was Newt's chief of staff, right?
Press secretary.
Press secretary. Yes.
You've mentioned Afghanistan a couple of times. And if I heard you correctly, you don't seem to agree with the current policy. What do you think the role of the U.S. government should be towards Afghanistan? Thank you.
Well, I believe that the role of the U.S. government is to protect America, and that means to be very clear about what our national security interests are. And if you look at Afghanistan, by the administration's own evaluation, there are only about 100 al-Qaeda members left in Afghanistan. So since we consider al-Qaeda the main source of danger for this country, what are we doing there? And every time there's an offensive in Afghanistan, we end up killing civilians and then apologizing, which is not exactly the way to win hearts and minds in Afghanistan. And there's a fascinating article in the New York Times about 3 weeks ago that compared what we are doing there, the amount of lives and treasure that we are wasting there, with what China is doing there. China is spending billions to buy up natural resources for their industry and to actually build goodwill in Afghanistan. So they're looking ahead at the future of their economy. They're building relationships in Afghanistan, and we're becoming more and more hated with every passing day. On top of it, our partner is a completely corrupt, unreliable government. So it doesn't really make any sense that that's where we are. And where are the threats coming from? Yemen, Somalia, homegrown terrorism. And the one thing I learned in my economics course at Cambridge was the concept of the opportunity cost. Every time we're doing something, we're foregoing doing something else. And that is, for me, the greatest danger, that we are taking our eye off real threats, including in our own airports. We have this charade of taking our shoes off. And that's why I feel so strongly about it. And when we are covering it pretty exhaustively, we started a live blog with a lot of the people who have the best sources in Afghanistan. So if you want to know about it in a granular way, come to HuffPost.
Yes.
Arianna, back to politics for a second. The rise of the independent voter has never been greater than now, I think, stretching back over the past 30 years or so. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party both seem to be polarized by characters such as morons like Sarah Palin for the Republican Party, and perhaps more locally, morons like the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. What do these parties need to do to try to take back some of people who feel completely disaffected by both?
It's the Gresham's Law again.
Yeah. Well, that's a very important question, because the rise of the independents is going to be a big phenomenon in the 2010 race. And I think that both political parties need to demonstrate that they are hearing what's happening in the country. And I really think it comes down to what's happening to the middle class, because the middle class is the foundation of this country. and what has made it possible for us to grow without huge animosities. And it's really true that people in America don't feel bad about other people having a lot more money. It's because there is always that upward mobility. There is the sense that you could participate in the American dream. And that is shattering. You know, now there is that sense that there is a downward mobility, that your children most likely are not going to do as well as you did if you're a member of the middle class. Now that is a horrific feeling. And I think that's what independents are responding to. And both political parties need to have an answer to that.
Next.
Hi. I wanted to first tell you I love your site. I find it incredibly intellectually stimulating, and I love the book recommendations, and I love the comedy section. It's one of my favorites. Anyway, I wanted to kind of go back to your conversation that you were having about you know, not relying on government to help us out of a lot of the dilemmas and difficulties that we're having. And I just wondered if you had any kind of, because there's so much happening where you see that both political parties are pretty ineffective and we can't really get anything accomplished. It just seems like the special interests really have us locked down. So is there any kind of vehicle or channel that you're going to be starting to implement or have already started but are maybe going to emphasize more that can help us sort of do more of a grassroots effort in making something happen to help benefit this middle class that's struggling like it is? So,
well, yes, we actually started something just before Christmas called Move Your Money. I don't know if you heard about it. But it came out of a dinner conversation that I was having with Eugene Jarecki, the filmmaker, and Nick Penniman, who runs our investigative fund, and Rob Johnson, who's an economist at the Roosevelt Institute. And we're talking about how these big banks that are too big to fail are just getting bigger. And community banks that are more likely to lend and help small businesses and help job creation are in trouble. On top of it, because mark to market is being applied to community banks very strictly, but not to the big Wall Street banks. So Eugene came up with this idea of making this video that it was just before Christmas, so he took It's a Wonderful Life and Mr. Bailey and Mr. Potter and contrasted the two bankers and juxtaposed it with what's happening now, and we launched this website called moveyourmoney.info. And Fred, don't worry, we didn't use Huffington Post money. It's we got a fund from the Tides Foundation, so it's an independent little operation that basically has caught fire. And thousands of people have moved their money, and they've written about it, and they've videotaped themselves moving their money, and they wrote how empowered they were, that they could do something, and go to their community banks. And then it's spreading now around the states. The state of New Mexico voted 65-0 to move the state money. And the other day, I was having breakfast with Harry Reid, and he had just listened to a 10-minute thing that NPR did on Move Your Money. And when he arrived, he said to his chief of staff, I want you to move the money of my PAC and my campaign to a community bank. So it's just happening. We're not doing anything anymore. But these are the best kind of grassroots campaigns, when you put an idea out there, and then it takes off on its own. And tomorrow morning, I'm taping a segment for next Sunday's CBS Sunday News. Diane Sawyer did it on her show. And it's just really an expression of people's frustration and wanting to really do something themselves. And these are, for me, are the best kind of movements.
Let me ask a follow-up. Are there other deep structural changes besides financial reform that are needed? I know a lot of liberals and progressives right now are frustrated by, the makeup of the Senate. That every state, from Wyoming to California, has the same two senators, and so there's this. The population isn't represented fairly according to that argument, and this creates this kind of gridlock where senators representing 15% of the population can hold up critical legislation that affects everybody. Those sorts of arguments. I know Lawrence Lessig, formerly the Stanford Law School, where is he now?
Harvard.
Has talked about we really need changes in the patent and copyright system. And there's some deep fundamental things. Do you subscribe to these ideas, or are you driving others of these ideas that can make America more governable and functioning in the 21st century?
Oh, absolutely. I think that what's happening in the Senate is completely dysfunctional. I mean, the abuse of the filibuster, which was definitely not intended to be used to stop low-level administration appointees from being able to be appointed. I mean, if you win an election, you should be able to nominate who you want in your government if you're the majority. And now the way that the Republicans are presenting reconciliation as the nuclear option, which it is not, is just another way in which government is completely dysfunctional. So yes, anything like that, including challenging the Supreme Court decision that treats corporations as individuals and campaign donations as free speech.
Well, unions get that right.
Well, yes, I don't think either of them should get it.
Next question.
I've noticed that the Huffington Post has published articles supporting the anti-vaccine movement and homeopathy, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, we have published a lot of articles on the living section about vaccinations. You know, Dr. Mark Hyman, David Kirby, and others, have questioned the connections between vaccinations and autism and other things. And we have also published others who disagree with them. So there's a whole debate on these medical issues. We have a medical editor who actually lives here, and whom you may know, Dr. Dean Ornish, and all these articles are vetted by him before they appear, so that we have articles which you may disagree with, but which are based on some scientific facts.
Next question.
Hello, Arianna. Right over here.
Over here.
Hi. I have lots of questions for you, mainly because you get to meet so many politicians. But I want to let you know that I have your application, and I read it every morning before I do anything else. And Rich, I go to your site too. So don't worry.
You're kidding.
So don't feel left out, please. You have in the media, you have there's a bias in both sides of the media. I mean, they claim to be centrist, but you can tell by the way they cover the news. There's a left and there's a right, and politicians get caught up in these polls and these blogs. Do you think the news media itself is setting this agenda for the politicians or for the way they govern?
Well, the news media has a lot of responsibility for what's happening. There is a tendency in the news media to basically confuse fairness with a kind of fake balance. So, for example, the idea that you have to present two sides to every story is not what journalism is supposed to be about. Journalism is supposed to be about ferreting out the truth. Let's say if you are writing a piece on evolution, you don't have to give equal time to creationism. If you're writing a piece on astrology, or astronomy rather, you don't have to give equal time to the idea that the Earth is flat. On certain issues, the jury is no longer out. And so I think it's very important to take that into account. Global warming, for example, we wasted years debating whether there is a science behind global warming. And we would have, say, Al Gore on the one hand, talking about the dangers of climate change, and then Senator James Inhofe telling us that global warming is a fraud. So and then having people saying it's snowing, therefore there's no global warming. And
although, it did take some dissent to challenge the IPCC's methods of gathering and distributing this information and subjecting it to peer review.
And that was great.
I mean, there wasn't the consensus that, as was claimed.
No, I think that pointing out what IPCC had done was perfectly legitimate. But the idea that generally there is no global warming, I mean, the James Inhofe idea, I use him as a symbol for that viewpoint, is just really not based on any science.
Next question.
Hi.
How many do we have left for? Two more. This one and one more.
I'm guessing that we already can know what your opinion is on the recent Supreme Court decision regarding the kind of unleashing of special interests and corporate money onto the campaign process. But I would also think that your readers and readers of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal probably already have a good idea of what they think about these issues, and that it's really those people that are less interested in politics and less educated about politics that might be more influenced by the traditional methods of commercials and mailings that kind of really advance the politics of the corporations. I'm just wondering what you think, if anything, can be done about that, and what effect you think it's going to have on the 2010 election and the election in 2012 as well.
Well, first of all, we very much want and try to get people on the site, and are doing so, who are not primarily interested in politics. And a lot of people come to the site for other things, comedy or living or entertainment. And that's very much our intention. We want people who then, they may just go visit the politics site or check that out and learn something they didn't know before, but who are not necessarily the sort of political addicts that were definitely there at the beginning of HuffPost. We wouldn't have grown as fast as we've been growing if our audience was just a political junkie. So in that sense, I hope that we are spreading information to people whose interest is not primarily political.
It's not all politics, but I guess really, I'm wondering what effect you think the Supreme Court case will have, like, over the traditional media. A lot now, TV will be a lot more relevant as more and more of the corporations can put more commercials on, send out more flyers. Just wondering what effect you think that will have, and will it drown out, media like yours, your politics section, or the New York Times politics section? How much effect will it have on those articles that are traditional news that show both sides? How much is it going to override that in the future elections?
Well, I don't think it's going to override the existing content, but it's going to saturate political advertising, because it will be easier to raise money and easier to buy politicians. My God, I thought it was easy enough, but if it remains unchallenged, it will have a big impact.
We have time for one more. Yes.
Arianna, I loved your article a few months back about Balloon Boy, the Balloon Boy phenomenon. So in this time of just competition, media trying to get as many page views as possible, what can media sources do to preserve their integrity and to avoid this downward spiral towards the lowest common denominator?
Well, Balloon Boy is a very good example, because that's where sort of, as an editor, you have to have a suspecting glance. The minute that happened, I just told our editors, this is not going to the top of the Huffington Post. I don't care if it's on the top of CNN. I don't care if it's on the top of MSNBC. It's not going on our top, because there was something very fishy to me about that story. And I remember that same day, I was on the Ed Show to talk about Afghanistan, And I arrived there, and it was all, the Ed show was all about the balloon boy. And I go there, and the first question is about the balloon boy. And I said, Ed, I really have no idea why we're talking about the balloon boy. By then, he had been found, right? I said, first of all, he's not the balloon boy. He's the attic boy. He was never in the balloon. He said, well, people are worried about the balloon boy. I said, really? He's been found. What are they worried about? And this kind of sensationalism makes me feel that maybe if we want to draw attention to, let's say, the fact that there are 1.5 million homeless children in the country, maybe we can just build a giant balloon and pretend we are putting them in it. We don't even have to put them in it. And it might get like 1% of the attention the balloon boy got. So that's definitely a problem with the media. But we can actually challenge it by not following suit, by having a different editorial coverage, and that affects then, I mean, how they're going to do the next balloon boy.
Well, Arianna, when we founded the Churchill Club 25 years ago, we knew we would have a lot of great Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, but we always had the hope that we would be able to attract people such as yourself. So we created 5 years ago, waiting for you to arrive, and you have not let us down. So let's give Arianna a big hand. That was a lot of fun.
Rich and Arianna, so this is like just a terrific dinner conversation where we all got to be a fly on the wall and some great questions from the audience. So in traditional Churchill Club fashion, we will pass along the fashionable Churchill Club t-shirt to each of you. And thank you for your participation, and thank you all for coming tonight. Thanks very much.